do you want to give it?
Okay, good afternoon everyone and welcome to the JPOMA webinar on the sewer tariffs. We are fortunate enough today to have Chantelle and Maike. I hope I get it right. I'm sorry.
Sure.
From Schindlers attorneys who will go through what their whole thing with the sewer tariffs. For those of you who don't know Chantelle, she is one of the leaders in municipal law and property law in probably South Africa. And I know that she is pursuing her doctorate in municipal law at Tux. So she's definitely the right person to be helping us today. She specializes specifically in commercial and residential property law with a focus on municipal property law, public and administrative law relating to property, and sectional title body corporate management. There's a lot more that Chantelle does, but for the purposes of today, that is, those are the areas that we are very grateful that she is so knowledgeable in. And with saying that, I'm going to pass it over to Chantelle and Maike, and then you guys can do your thing.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Angela. And thanks for having us. My name is Chantelle Gladwin-Wood, and I'm a partner in the Municipal Law Department at Schindlers. And before I go any further, I'd just like to apologize if I sound like I'm slurring or lisping. I know the Boeing's flown over, but I promise I have not been drinking, although after we are finished today, you may feel that I should have been after what I'm going to tell you. I had some dental work done recently and now I have difficulty pronouncing my words properly. So I apologize for that. If I go too fast or if you guys battle to understand, please would you pop a comment in the box and Angela should be able to see that and she can just relay that to us. Okay, I'd like to introduce my partner, Maike Gohl. She's another partner in our Municipal Law Department at Schindlers. And she's kind of my partner in crime in this particular issue. So we have been contacted by many body corporates, but not only body corporates, property owners of all different types of properties. So things from retirement villages to life rights schemes to sectional title body corporates and even just to large blocks of flats over the last couple of weeks. And we've seen a pattern emerge from having looked at all of these queries that were brought to us. So what we've noticed is that most of these adjustments relating to sewer happened in the August 2020 invoices, although we have seen some adjustments happen in July, as early as July 2020, although it was very few, and we expect many more coming up in the September invoices. But just because you haven't been affected by this yet, it doesn't mean that you are not necessarily going to be affected. Although that being said, we have no idea of knowing who is going to be affected because it's based on some kind of internal audit that's been done by the City of Joburg. Okay, so what's happening? In short, the City of Joburg has realized that it has been incorrectly categorizing or classifying certain types of properties when it comes to sewer charges. Now, sewer charges are based on the City of Joburg sewer tariffs. This is basically a document that sets out how much money you have to pay for your sewer based on all the different types of properties, and it explains how the rands and cents calculation works. Now, this is a document which is updated every single year, and it increases, the cost of the tariff normally increases every year based on inflation. And the City of Joburg's financial year runs from the 1st of July every year until the 30th of June the next year. So when we talk about financial years for City of Joburg, we start talking about a financial year, if we call it, for example, let's say it's the 2017-2018 financial year. What we mean is that the financial year starts on the 1st of July 2017 and it runs until the 30th of June 2018. The City of Joburg has realized that if it goes and it looks at the wording of its definitions in its sewer tariff document from the 1st of July 2017 up until now, that it's made a mistake and it's incorrectly billed some properties based on, and I'm going to explain this a little bit more in detail just now, but just for the sake of keeping it simple at this point, based on the block of flats or the flats tariff, and they've been charging properties based on that tariff, when by City of Joburg's view, they ought to have been charging rather on the multi-dwelling tariff, which is quite a lot more expensive in relation to certain years. And so what it's done is it's trying to recoup the money that it thinks it should have charged but failed to do because it made a mistake. And it's passing adjustments on the sewer invoice, or whichever invoice the body corporate or the property receives its sewer on. You get a big lump sum invoice of several $100,000 rand. And I'm going to show you what it looks like in just a sec. It looks a little bit like this, right? So it comes out and it says Johannesburg water and sanitation. And then it's got all of these funny adjustments here. I hope you can see with my mouse as a pointer, all the green adjustments where it says sewer basic residential credit, and then sewer basic residential debit. Okay. And at the end of the day, what pops out is usually a massive amount owing to the municipality. But this is what we are talking about today. What on earth is this bill? How is it calculated? Is it correct or not? And if it's not correct, how do I challenge it? So, to go back to the beginning and tell you a whole long story about what the tariffs say, because it's rather confusing. Joburg has changed its tariffs from the 1st of July 2017 up until now. So if you go and you look at the tariff documents applicable to the 4 financial years in question, we started with the 2017-2018 financial year, we had 2018-2019, we had 2019-2020, and we are now in the 2020-2021 financial year, which started on the 1st of July 2020, and it's going to run until the 30th of June 2021. There are 4 different tariffs over 4 financial years that we need to look at in order to discuss this. When we start at the very beginning and we look at the earliest tariffs that you have for sewer, 2017 and 2018, what you find in those tariffs is the definitions that you see on your screen. There's a definition of a dwelling unit, a definition of multi-dwelling, and a definition of flat. Now, when we think of the word flat or apartment, what we typically think of is one building which is high rise, and it's got lots of individual dwelling units inside it that people live in. And we usually think of this kind of building as having one communal entrance. So it might have more than one communal entrance. You might have, for example, entrances and exits for fire purposes, fire escapes on the sides of the building, but generally you have one communal entrance that most people use when it's not in an emergency situation. And then they go up and down the stairs, or they go up and down the elevators inside the building. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about a block of flats here. When we talk about multi-dwelling, what do we mean by that? We mean any arrangement of dwelling units, of homes at a particular property, which is not a block of flats. So, for example, let's take a sectional title scheme. Let's say that you've got 50 freestanding homes on a big piece of land, and there's a communal pool and a guardhouse and maybe a tennis court. If the units themselves are freestanding, then that would definitely qualify as a multi-dwelling property, and it would not classify as a block of flats because it's not one single building with a communal entrance, right? So these definitions that we are going to be talking about today, these definitions have been in the tariff since 2017. This is not something new. However, the definitions, the base definitions, have morphed over time. And I'm going to take you through how it's done that, because that's created a heck of a lot of confusion in the industry. Okay. So in 2017-2018, we did have a definition of a multi-dwelling, and we did have a definition of a flat. But what we didn't have, and this is a screenshot of the 2017-2018 tariffs, we did not have a charge in those tariffs based on the definition of a flat or a block of flats. We only had a charge at that period in time based on a multi-dwelling. Now that's a bit odd. Why would you bother to have these different descriptions, these different definitions, if you don't have a charge based on that definition? Well, in this particular financial year, it was just an oversight. It happened, and nobody was any the wiser, and life carried on, because at that point in time, nothing turned on it. That was 2017. Then 2018 came along, and the definitions were still there, and they remained unchanged for multi-dwelling and for flats. But in 2018-2019, they then brought back the charge based on the definition of flat. So in this particular year, you've got your charge based on block of flats, and you've got a different charge based on multiple dwellings. Okay, so this is the first year under the period that we are talking about that you've actually got both charges based on the two definitions in the tariff structure. Right, 2019, 2020, and the city's getting a bit more desperate for money, and times are changing, and they decide that they are not going to allow properties that are worth, or where you have a flat which is worth less than 700,000 Rand. They are not going to allow a building which is comprised of flats which is valued at more than 700,000 Rand continue to fall under a block of flats because they're losing too much money. So now you must automatically fall into the multi-dwelling tariff, and then you're going to have to pay quite a bit more. So on the 1st of July 2020, when they introduced, or when the new definitions for this tariff kicked in on the first day of that financial year, any block of flats which previously was one big building, which was consisting of lots of little dwelling units with a communal entrance, where that may previously have qualified as a block of flats, even if the value of those individual flats was more than 700,000 Rand. As of the 1st of July 2019, that ceased to apply, and if your values of your flats were over that, you would have been kicked over into the more expensive tariff, which is the multi-dwelling tariff. Right, so that was 2019, 2020, and you see here the definition of multiple dwellings is amended so that they exclude the, sorry, wrong slide, that one over here. They exclude flats that have a rates valuation of more than 700,000 Rand. There you go. Okay. So that was the last 3 years, and the current financial year, which started on the 1st of July 2021, is pretty much the same. So if you have a building with however many dwelling units connected to each other, multi-story, and a communal entrance, you still don't qualify as a block of flats if your units are valued at more than 700,000 Rand. And that's because of the inclusion of the qualification over here, which my mouse is pointing to, in 1.2 of the tariffs. Right. So in short, the city of Joburg has had a number of changing qualifications and changing definitions over the last 4 years, which is not all that easy to follow, even if you are technically au fait with tariffs and how they work and all this jazz, this definition and all the rest of it. So we're starting from a very confusing base. And what I'm going to do is try to explain how the amount that pops out at the end of the day on your bill, which is this lovely little colorful example over here, how this is connected to these changing definitions and these changing qualifications that I've explained over the years. So when we get a bill, somebody sends us a bill and they say, help, what's going on here? We break the bill down into the components that you can see on your screen. The first thing you have to do is you have to get rid of, or not get rid of, but you have to disregard, for the purposes of this exercise, any current month billing. Because if you want to do a reconciliation to say, okay, are you being backbilled for historical stuff? You mustn't take into account what's happening today. We're just going to park that for the time being. So if you look on this example over here, the yellow bits and pieces, everything that's yellow is current month consumption. In this particular bill, they were being charged for some water, and you can see the steps over here where they were being charged for water, and you can see the sewer charge for the current month in this particular bill is 08/2020. I'm sorry, I know the resolution is actually pretty crappy, but that's your current month. So we're just going to disregard the yellow bits because that's your current month billing. What we're trying to understand is, what are they doing historically? So here's where we're looking at the green bits, which is where they pass a whole bunch of credits, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we're looking at the pink bits, where they pass some debits.
Chantelle,
and then we've got
I
the
just
blue
jump
bits over
in
here. Yes?
Just with regard to the sewer charges that were billed in the yellow bits, you'll notice that when the new tariff was, well, not the new tariff, but when the new tariffs were applied for this year to the invoices, you probably would have already been billed based on the multi-dwelling tariff and not on the block of flats tariff if you had previously been billed on the block of flats tariff. So in this rebill, the city doesn't address anything from July 2020 onward. It's only before that. That's why Chantelle says you can ignore the sewer availability charge for this month as well, because it's already been billed on the new tariff and it doesn't form part of the rebill as such.
So thanks, Maike. That's very important, and I didn't explain that properly, so well done. Most people are finding that when they get this big bill, they had already in prior months received what they understood as being an inflated sewer bill, because in June 2020 their bill was maybe half for sewer of what it was when July 2020 rolled round. So many people had already seen a jump from the end of the last financial year, June 2020, to the beginning of this financial year, which started on the 1st of July. And they would, and when I'm talking about the reconciliations that we are looking at here, I'm talking about one that happened to have been done in the August account, which means that, as Maike has just said, we ignore the current because they've already switched this particular building onto the multi-dwelling tariff, because that's where they think it should be, in the July 2020 tariff. So as far as the City of Joburg is concerned, they don't have any back billing to do for the 2021 financial year, because they started putting the building on the tariff that they think it should be on already from the first month in that financial year. So that's why we say you can ignore this yellow bit. If, for example, your tariff remained unchanged and you were still on block of flats, even in this particular financial year, so even in July or even in August, and they only switch you over for the first time in September, then we are going to look at the yellow bit, because the yellow bit's going to be a little bit different. So I'm just hoping that I can explain today conceptually to give people principles to work off of rather than numbers, because obviously the numbers are going to differ from one case to the next. Okay, so what are they doing here when they have a whole bunch of green credits and a whole bunch of pink debits? If you go and you look at how many units there are in your building or in your sectional title scheme, in your life right village, whatever the case may be, and you reverse engineer the bill, and that means we look at these amounts and we allocate them to financial years, because what City of Joburg likes to do is it likes to pass adjustments based on calculations that it does for a lump sum period of time, but they break it down into financial years. So the line items relate to different financial years, because every year, as I've explained earlier, the amount of money charged based on the sewer tariffs is going to increase. So for them to track their calculations and to calculate how much you owe, or how much they think you owe rather, when they are changing you, they do it on a year-by-year basis. So you can go, and if you did a little exercise where you said, how many units do I have in my scheme? Okay, let's say I've got 10 units, right? Let me times that by the tariff that I was charged on in 2017, 2018. How do I know what that tariff is? Well, I go back and I look on my invoices for that period of time, and I see, okay, my charge is X amount per unit. And then I go and I link it up to the tariff and I read the tariff and I see, okay, this amount per unit, this R5 per unit, that was the block of flats charge, or whatever the case may be. That's not the real charge. I'm just using these numbers for illustrative purposes. So that's how you work out what tariff you were on for each year. It's really, really important to not assume, if you get a bill like this, that you were always on the block of flats tariff, which is cheaper, and that you are now being converted to the multi-dwelling tariff, which is more expensive. A lot of people start from that assumption, and it turns out that that assumption is wrong. You must not operate from that assumption. You must go back all the way to the 1st of July 2017, and you must look at what tariff you were charged each and every year. Okay, you write it down. In 2017 financial year, 2018, I had this many units and I was charged on this tariff X amount of money for each one. And you do that for all the 4 years. Then you look at this bill again.
Sorry, CG,
yeah?
can I?
Yes,
just with the 2017 financial year, Chantelle mentioned earlier that the city didn't actually set out a specific tariff, so rands and cents amount for the year of 2017-2018. It was an oversight by the city. So Prior to 2017, the practice by the city was to have the block of flats tariff be exactly the same as that applied to a dwelling which is up to and including 300 square meters. So technically, because that city didn't give you a tariff amount for that year, you would have fallen into the multi-dwelling tariff in any event. But what the city actually did do physically on its invoices is bill you based on the up to 300 square meters tariff. So just for clarity's sake, if you go onto the tariff sheets, it is 171 Rand and 97 cents for the year of 2017-2018. So that. So because they didn't give us a specific tariff, just if you want to do the exercise and work it backwards, that would be the tariff that you would be looking at.
Thanks, Maike. I should have mentioned that and I didn't. Thank you for stopping me there. So this is what Maike was talking about. Remember in the 2017-2018 financial year, they forgot to put in a specific charge based on the block of flats, and they only had a charge for multiple dwellings. And what Maike is saying is that everyone for that year, they just got lumped into this bracket here, up to and including, oh, sorry about that. Every time I click my mouse, it moves to the next slide. Up to and including 300 meters squared. So that's the amount that Maike is talking about there, that you would have been charged on for that year. Okay. So once you have gone and looked at, okay, what were you charged for each unit in each of these years, you then do exactly the same exercise, but by asking the opposite question. Let's just say that you were charged as a block of flats for all of those years. You go and do the same exercise, but now you ask, well, what would I have been charged if I was a multi-dwelling? And you go and write the number of units, the tariff for every year, and you do your calculation. Then, when you look at these numbers over here, you will see that the debits and the credits tie up neatly for each financial year. So the way that city does it, and I don't know why they do it, they have one debit for each year. You can see there's 4 debits, okay? Although as Maike has said, sometimes the reconciliation doesn't include the current financial year, which is the 2021 year. So what that means is that one or more of these debits relates to the same financial year, okay? So for one of the years, there's going to be 2 debits, but you don't know which is which, you just left to guess. And then there's going to be one corresponding debit for each year, but there's always more debits than there is credits. And we're not sure why. We think it's got to do with when the city's system split for VAT. If you guys remember, on the 1st of April 2018, VAT increased from 14% to 15%. And in order for them to calculate the blue portion of the bill at the bottom here, which shows you VAT at 14% and VAT at 15%, they needed to say, okay, we need to treat the financial year in which VAT was split, which happened to be the 2017-2018 financial year. We need to do the calculations for that year in 2 separate parts. One part relating to before the 1st of April, which was where the VAT is calculated at 14%, and the second part relating to the portion of that year where the VAT was over 15, where we changed to 15%. Okay, so that's why you end up with 4, or in the case of if they're doing a recon, including the 2021 financial year, you might even have 5 debits, and then you've got many more, credits, and then you've got many more debits. Now, I can't tell you why. No one can tell you why. Their system ends up with more debits than credits. Why it doesn't neatly split the debits into the financial years the same way it splits the credits? Because we can reverse engineer the credit to get it. But the debits, even though the amount of money that's billed at the end of the day is correct, when I say correct, I mean assuming that what the city is trying to do in change or tariff is correct, which is a whole other question I'll get to in a second. The rands and cents are sometimes correct, but you've just got to add them all up, and you've got to say, if you add up all of the debits over this period, is it the correct amount of debits based on the methodology that the city has applied? And you can't always tie the debits back to financial years. It just depends. Completely inexplicable to us. That's how we reverse engineer the bill. And yes, yeah.
Just with regard to the VAT portion of these, don't try and understand what the city did. They use a top-up method with regard to VAT, and it's going to just make things a lot more complicated if you do try and reverse engineer the VAT. It's near impossible because of the way that they rebuild VAT. So if you do these calculations, do them excluding VAT. Look, all of the amounts in the city's tariffs are exclusive of VAT, but I'm just pointing this out to you so that if you want to do this exercise, do not look at the sections where it says VAT, because it's just going to confuse you.
Okay, so as Maike has said, do your calculations ex VAT, because it's even more complicated to reverse engineer the VAT. Okay, so at the end of the day, what is the city doing and why is it doing it? It's saying to properties, we think we accidentally undercharged you for the last 3 years based on the block of flats tariff, which is cheaper than the multi-dwelling tariff. So what we're doing is we are now back charging you for the last 3 years for all the amounts that we actually ought to have billed you in the first place. So let's talk about whether that's lawful. Sewer charges, like refuse charges, are considered in our law as rates. And a rate is a form of a tax, and a tax in our law only prescribes after 30 years. So what that means is that essentially, if the city has underbilled you, it can hypothetically go back and recover the amounts that it ought to have billed you by correcting the mistake, so long as the amounts that they are claiming have not prescribed. And prescription is 30 years. If they're going back 3 years, they are lawfully entitled to invoice you and to recover the amounts. This is on 2 presumptions, or 2 qualifications, I should say, rather. The first is that it is correct that your tariff ought to change, because in the majority of cases that we have seen, it is not correct that the tariff ought to have changed, and that may apply to only one of the financial years, or it may apply to more than one, even all of the financial years. What do I mean by that? You must be thinking, how bizarre is it that I can be a block of flats one day and a multi-dwelling the next? How can that be possible? The answer to this question lies in the fact that the definitions from the 1st of July 2019 onwards included the qualification that you cannot have a block of flats with flats that are valued at more than 700,000 Rand. So what that means is if you had a single multi-story building on your property with one communal entrance, and all of your flats, let's say they were valued at $1 million each, right? This might be a freehold earth which has got a block of flats on owned by one owner, or it might be a sectional title scheme which happens to be built in the arrangement of a building which is one building with a communal entrance, or it might be, for example, a share block company which is running a holiday scheme, like a holiday timeshare thing, and it's in Durban and it's overlooking the beach, whatever the case is. If it was a single building with a communal entrance and many units in it, that then would be your typical block of flats, right? So if all of the units were valued at over 1 million Rand, you would have then qualified as a block of flats up until the 30th of June 2019. From the 1st of July 2019 onwards, even though nothing changes at the land itself, because of the change in the definition in the city's tariffs, you then no longer qualify as a block of flats and you kicked over into the multi-dwelling tariff category. So you might find that the city of Joburg has incorrectly classified a particular property for only 2 years out of the 4 years, which is what we're finding seems to be the case, or it might have incorrectly classified you as a multi-dwelling where you should have been a block of flats for the entire period. If, however, if all of your units in your building have always been less than 700 and remain less than 700 today, then your claim is for an incorrect classification for 4 years. But if your units were over 700 at the 1st of July 2019, your claim would only be for incorrect classification for the first 2 years, for the 2017-2018 and the 2018-2019 financial years. Maike, do you want to add anything on there before I move on?
Yes, so also just bear in mind that if your building is owned by one owner and the building as a whole is valued at, let's say, 18 million Rand, which a lot of the CBD buildings are, you would take that value and divide it by the number of units. You could also prorate it depending on the size of each of the units. But you would basically, just as a very simple exercise, take the value that's been ascribed to the whole building and divide it by the number of units, and then you should be able to come up with a roundabout value of what has been ascribed to each of the units.
So what Maike is talking about appears in all of the tariffs for every year. And it's under the definition of not the definition, it's where you talk about how much do you charge a multi-dwelling property. So what it does is it explains that a multi-dwelling property is where two or more dwelling units have been erected on a single earth. An earth size shall be determined in respect of each dwelling by dividing the total area of the earth by the number of the dwelling units erected thereon. So what you do is you, as Maike has explained, you take the total size of the earth, you divide it by the number of dwellings, and you end up with a number. If that number is under 300, you get charged the cheaper amount here, which is for earth size up to including 300. But if it's over 300, you get charged on that size there. Okay. So the first premise I said was the city is lawfully entitled to change your category and to pull back amounts that it ought to have billed you, but it failed to have billed you, provided that the billing is correctly calculated and you actually should have had a change of tariff. There may be billing errors inside here. For example, when we do this exercise, we often find that the VAT is wrongly calculated. There's something wrong with the city's VAT algorithm. And we often find that these numbers here, the debits and the credits that are passed, are incorrect because the city is not applying A, the correct number of units to the calculations, or B, it's not applying the correct earth size, as Maike has just explained. So they might do all their calculations assuming that your earth size is actually 0 to 300, but it should actually be 300 to 600, right? So we go and we double check all of that stuff. So if it is the case that you actually should have had a change of tariff because you were wrongly billed on the block of flats when you should have been billed on the multi-dwelling, that's number one. And if number two, they have done the calculations correctly from a rands and cents perspective, then in that case, they would be lawfully entitled to claim these amounts from you because they have not prescribed. This is on the billing front. But I want to take a step back and I want to ask another question. How many people expected to receive a giant bill out of the middle of nowhere for some technical error that the city made that we had no idea was coming? And the answer is obviously nobody. Nobody corporate has been saving up for years and has a fund ready to deal with this because nobody knew that this was coming. And this brings us to a technical point associated with this problem, which is that the law provides that when a municipality needs to or is planning on taking a decision which affects a consumer, so in this case your consumer would be the ratepayer, and that decision is going to adversely and materially affect that particular consumer or ratepayer, the decision maker is obliged by law in terms of the Promotion of Administrative Justice Act, as well as the Constitution, to notify the consumer or the ratepayer in advance of what decision is going to be made and how it's going to impact them. And the reason that our law requires this is to try and avoid the situation where a decision is made wrongly by the decision maker. So it gives an opportunity to the person who is affected to say, hang on, you've got it wrong, City of Joburg. I am a block of flats. My entire building is one multi-story building with a communal entrance. And my units have always been valued at less than 700. So don't change my category. I'm correct. I know you assume I'm not because it's convenient to you because you're going to make more money, but that's not right. And the city ought to have followed the proper procedures set out in PAJA and notified every single one of the affected parties and given them the opportunity to make representations to at least minimize the impact of an incorrect decision on the city's part. But it didn't do that. So what can we do about the fact that the city has not followed proper procedure? Well, you could, if you wanted to, have the decision set aside in court because proper procedure was not followed. But that's only going to get you so far if the decision was correct from a substantive perspective, meaning that if it is correct that you were on the wrong tariff and you were undercharged, it's only going to help you temporarily to set the decision aside, because they're simply going to, after the decision is set aside, hopefully, I would imagine, follow the correct procedure to change the tariff and then go ahead and change the tariff. So we are not promoting the idea here that anyone rushes off to court and brings a big application because they didn't follow PAJA procedure. They did not follow PAJA procedure, and what they've done is procedurally illegal, but it's not the answer to everybody's problems to just have the decision set aside on that basis. Our recommendation is rather to understand where there has been an incorrect billing based on substantive reasons, meaning where your tariff has been changed when it ought not to have been changed, or where, even if it is correct that your tariff should be changed, have you been billed correctly? You might have been overbilled simply because the city made a mistake and it did its calculations wrong. We've seen cases where when the city does this adjustment referred to over here, when it does these numbers here and it pops out with 510,000 Rand, when it did these calculations, the city assumed without checking that this particular property for all these years was billed on the block of flats tariff. And so they assumed that they had to convert the tariff for the full 3-year period. But when we went and checked the historical invoices, which is step 1, as I was explaining earlier, we figured that the city had already billed these guys on the more expensive multi-dwelling tariff for the 2017, 2018, and 2018, 2019 years. So there was no conversion due. There was no money due for those 2 years because the city had already billed them at the higher rate. And the only conversion or the only charge that ought to have been due was in respect of the 2019-2020 year. This number sitting at 510 should have dropped to about 200, which is significant. So that is why I say, even if it is correct that you are due a change of tariff for whichever financial year, you still need to check the billing and make sure that when the city is billing you for that change, it's billing you the correct amount and it hasn't made a mistake in its calculation. That, in short, then, is my spiel. And I'm sure you guys are not interested in reading the bits and pieces in our slides. What is the suggested solution? As I've said, you need to follow the dispute resolution procedure set out by the city and its credit control policy, its bylaws, and then, of course, Section 62 of the Local Government Municipal Property Municipal Systems Act, which is the appeal provision. And you need to raise the dispute properly before the municipality, and if they don't resolve it, you then need to appeal. After that process has run its course, if you haven't gotten any relief, and unfortunately at the moment, we aren't seeing many matters resolved even after you followed the dispute resolution process due to, number one, the normal delay in City of Joburg sorting stuff out, which has been going on for the last 10 years. That's no secret for whatever the reasons are there. And then obviously COVID is exacerbating things. It's making things worse. So are you going to see relief if you do that? Yes, you may very well. But if you don't, what is your next step? Well, our proposal is bring an application against the City of Johannesburg to correct your billing. When I say my proposal is this is my proposal because for many, many years of working against the city in these types of matters, I've learned that you're going to save yourself money going to court early on in the process and not fiddling around with trying to have this meeting and that meeting and escalating it to the mayor, and then this guy dies and then it gets sent to another department and then you log a query and then your councillor promises to help, and then 5 years later you're going around circles and you've got the same problem. And it's been exacerbated because over those 5 years, there's been another problem on your account with the meter, and then there's been another problem on your account with this and that, and these problems compound each other, and it blows up to the point where you've got 3 problems which are pretty much inextricable, and it just makes everything so much more difficult to resolve. So our advice is always hit it quick and hit it as hard as you can. get it out of your life. And that might, not does, but might mean a court application. So we run lots of these kinds of things, and we are trying to help the public at the moment because we know that so many people are affected by this particular problem with some kind of special discounted rate where we can try and utilize technology and clever methods of information gathering to be able to bring people who are affected into the same court application, which is what we call a multi-party court application. And what we're doing is we are basically bringing people together and bringing one court application with a whole number of people to reduce the legal costs as much as we humanly can, so that instead of you having to run a court application by yourself as your body corporate or as your sectional title scheme or whatever the case may be, sorry, those two are the same thing. That was pretty damn, they're synonymous. Your sectional title body corporate, or your share block scheme or whatever the case may be, against the city of Johannesburg on your own, where you bring it together with other people and you have the leverage and the bargaining power, we hope, of 20 or 100 or 200 or however many people affected by the same problem. That, your strength lies in numbers. It brings the legal cost down, but it also gives you the ability to get the right people at Johannesburg to notice the problem and hopefully, obviously, to sort it out before we get to court action. But if everybody's going on their own, it's not necessarily going to be as effective as if everybody came together and it was addressed from an industry-wide perspective. So we're trying to find a solution to a problem that we know affects probably hundreds of people. Our best estimate is around 300 properties affected. Although, as I've said earlier, we're not sure of the exact number because we only know people who come to us. We don't know about everyone affected because we don't know how the city has determined who it's auditing. And obviously, we only represent a small fraction of people in Joburg. We certainly don't represent the greater numbers or everyone. But from what we've seen, it's become a massive industry problem very, very quickly over the last month and a half. And we're trying to find ways to address that from the most cost-effective perspective, and also in a manner that really brings justice to all. Because if we can reduce the legal costs to the point where almost every body corporate that is affected, or every life rights scheme, or whatever the case is, has the ability to participate from a financial perspective, we can really garner that strength in numbers, and we can try to bring justice to all so that we don't end up with, the larger schemes having to carry the financial burden. So that's what we're trying to do to help, and we do hope that it is going to help. I think that's my spiel. I haven't got anything else to say. Maike, do you want to add anything?
Just one thing, and I don't want to open a whole nother can of worms here, but if your property is a sectional title scheme and you guys have been hit with a massive bill where the reserve fund doesn't cover it, I would seriously suggest that you speak to the trustees about raising a special levy or something to hold the current owners liable for those amounts now, because if you don't, you're going to regret it once people start selling and stuff. You can raise the special levy with the caveat that it only becomes due and payable at such time that the property gets sold. So for clearance figures, from the body corporate, they would only then have to pay for those amounts, but raise them now to cover the losses that you'll suffer if you don't raise the special levy to cover those amounts. And rather than have those amounts in a trust account and hold them until the dispute with the city is sorted out, and pay back the owners, if they're looking at selling in the next couple of months, rather than the body corporate having to somehow come up with the shortfall.
Sorry, just to add to what Maike is talking about. When body corporates get large bills, sectional title body corporates, and it's a particular problem in Joburg because Joburg's billing is just so terrible, and it happens so frequently. The gut reaction of most boards of trustees is to say, "Well, cook, our bill is wrong. We can't possibly owe this amount of money." Now, if you've done your investigation and you determine that, okay, I do actually owe this amount of money, or if you determine I might owe this amount of money, but I might be able to, through legal action, bring the bill down, you then need to question what is the best way to deal with this from a financial perspective as a trustee. Because as a trustee, you stand in a fiduciary relationship to the body corporate. And if there are amounts owing by the current members of the body corporate, as unpalatable as those amounts are, if they are owing, they are owing. And you need to make sure that the body corporate takes steps to invoice those amounts to the owners, and then if necessary to recover those amounts. And again, I understand, because I've been involved in so many of these, the heartache and the frustration and the anger that comes at particularly trustees and managing agents when something like this happens, because the owners stand up and go, what is this? I don't know this. Where does it come from? Blah, 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 blah. It's not my fault. And they panic and they react very badly, and they tend to blame the managing agents and the trustees when half the time this is completely beyond them. It's not their fault. It's Joburg's billing error. But they remain obliged, nevertheless, if the amounts are actually owing by the body corporate, to invoice the current owners their portion of that bill. Now, figuring out what a portion of the bill is can become very complicated, because just for example, if you take a 4-year reconciliation like the one that we've explained here, okay, so this is your current and this is the past 3 financial years. How many owners sold in the 2017, 2018, 2019 financial years who are no longer owners of the scheme? You've got to go and say, well, this owner sold at this date and his portion of the liability is X, and this owner sold at this date and his portion of the liability is Y. You've got to understand who owes what of this big bill here. For the members who are still members, because they still own the properties, you then need to raise the levy against their account. If you never raise the levy against their account and they decide to exit and they owe, let's say, 30 grand, and they sell, you can't claim it at clearance because you've never loaded it onto their levy statement, so you must raise it. As Maike has said, there are a number of options that you can utilize as a body corporate, and your managing agents like Trafalgar, they are going to be there to advise you as to how to handle this. There are lots of options as to when you ought to say that those amounts are payable, because if you just say to your owners, hey guys, surprise, here's a 50 grand bill for each of you, pay it tomorrow, we're cutting your lights off, kind of thing. Okay, I'm not endorsing that you should cut people's lights off, it's illegal, I'm just giving you an example. If you say that, people are going to be up in arms and they're going to be it's going to be just horrendous. So you can't do that. So lots of options for the trustees, and managing agents can advise them how to deal with the scenario. But if you don't raise those amounts against the invoices, the levy statements, and people exit, you then make it harder to recover the amounts from those owners who have exited. And you may, as a trustee, be accused of some kind of negligence for not having done your job, which is raise it against the people who are owners while they are still owners. It's bad enough that you've got to go and try and recover from Mr. Smith and Mrs. whatever who left, Mrs. Brown, who left the scheme 3 years ago. As a body corporate, you may take the view that it's not financially worth doing that because you've got to trace them and it's only 1,000 rand. So you may decide, okay, the body corporate is going to have to find these funds to pay the CO day bill out of somewhere else. But don't let the portion of the bill that is irrecoverable because people have exited the scheme increase whilst you are trustee, because that can be a very dangerous thing for you. Anything else, Maike? No? Okay.
Okay, so we do have a couple of questions that have come through, but before we get to those, I don't know if you want to discuss what we talked about in the email, where you're looking for people to join your class action, your multi-party action, where you the contribution and what those contributions would, what they would cover you for. I don't know if you want to cover that, if that's still something that you're looking at. Because I think it's a brilliant idea. So, and I think members would also think it's a brilliant idea.
No problem, Angela. I just want to be very straight up with everyone in the audience here. As an attorney, I am very cautious. I don't want to tout. Now, touting has historically, where an attorney does a kind of knock and drop, where you are trying to address people who are not your clients and persuade them to become clients by giving them pamphlets or by cold calling them or something like that. And I don't want this to be perceived as that. So we were here today to explain the sewer problems and what they are and try to help people realize what they can do about it themselves. And I know that, we have very great years and you've inquired about it. I'm quite happy to respond to your request to just explain what we are doing. We are offering affected parties who would like to join our multi-party application the opportunity to come in at a fixed fee of 15,000 ex VAT. That's for everything. So we'll do the calculations and say you've been overcharged, you've been undercharged, okay, hopefully never undercharged, but overcharged, and this is what you should recover, and do all the legal work for you guys, the letters of demand, the appeals, and then obviously the court application, and protect you from disconnection because Joburg might be knocking on your door to try and cut off your electricity and water. And the 15,000 is a fixed sum for everything. So even if we have to bring a contempt application to force the city to adjust your account because it's not reversed the right amount, or if we have to bring an urgent court application to protect you from disconnection, anything like that, it's all included. So we are planning to take as many people as are interested in joining us, and we're putting together a kitty from this, and our guarantee to you guys is we will sort you all out for that fixed fee. It's not going to exceed that. And what we are trying to do, but this is subject to the number of people who join, because many hands make light work, is if we can get over 150 people join, I said people affected properties joining, we can reduce that amount. And if we can get over 200, we can reduce it even further. And we can actually then refund you a portion of that 15,000 Rand down to 10,000 Rand, which means that if we can get more than 200 people on board, then everybody will only have paid 10,000. And the idea behind this scheme is the scheme. It sounds terrible. It sounds like a pyramid or a Ponzi scheme. It's not a scheme at all. The idea behind this offer and this arrangement is to try and give justice to all, as I explained earlier. We're trying to find an amount that is enough for us to be able to realistically run these legal challenges and benefit so many people, but at a charge that their body corporate can actually realistically afford. And at the same time, we are trying to leverage off of strength in numbers so that we can quickly and effectively deal with this. And guys, I say leverage off of strength of numbers. I've sat in front of the municipal manager and the mayor and the head of billing and across the boardroom table, and I've been told stories and it doesn't come true. So there is getting people in front of a boardroom table and negotiating and using bargaining power, and then there is actually making it happen on the accounts. And sometimes they are the same thing and sometimes they are not. So I don't want everyone to think here that simply because we can get 200 people together, we are automatically going to have this resolved in 1 month. I mean, that would be super awesome. I would be the happiest person alive, but I'm not going to make that kind of promise, because in my experience, Joburg is very slow to respond to anything where it needs to write off amounts that are due and payable, or that it regards as being due and payable, because of the financial impact on its, its financial statements, its liquidity, and so on and so forth. So that's the offer in short. And anyone who's interested, I suppose, Angela, maybe you could just refer them through to us. We are not advertising this broadly. We are not putting flyers out or, something on our website or whatever the case may be. People are welcome to contact us, and we'd be more than happy to chat to you and bring you in and help you out on this basis. But it's a referral basis. We're not going around looking for additional clients because we really don't want to be perceived as tossing.
So, I mean, most of our members will know what legal fees cost. So I think 15,000 Rand to have your building protected, and that's 15,000 Rand per building, to be protected, and also to have your accounts audited and to prevent disconnection, I think is a really good price. I've seen bills come in a lot higher than that, and I think it's, and what I really like about it is that 15,000 Rand will then go towards the class action. So it's not just going, it's actually going to a bigger picture as well, which I think is fantastic. It's very civic thinking of you guys, which we really do appreciate. So thank you for that. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to go through this, the questions that we have at the moment. So this is more of a comment from Diggy. He says that they have 112 social housing units, all around 40 square meters, but they're paying around 489 Rand per unit on sewer. So their bill came in at 49K. So I'm not sure where they're getting that 489 from, because that doesn't, I didn't.
Give me a sec. I just want to. Is that what month is that? Does he say what month it is?
I think it was from this last month. Diggy, if you could just let us know which month this was for. And then we'll come back. Where is he? Let me just see if he's...
Yeah, because if it's, and I'm just trying to work off of these numbers here, it's probably something plus that, but we just need to know what billing period it's in, and we'll quickly reverse engineer it for you.
August.
August this year, hey?
Yeah.
Okay, so sorry, I'm jumping backwards and forwards now. And you said it's about 489.
Yeah.
Okay, something is definitely wrong there, because if you were being charged on the block of flats tariff, it would be 228 plus that. And if you were on the multi-dwelling, it would be, let me just check I'm in the right year. Sorry,
It's 443. It's 443 Rand and 96 Rand ex VAT, including VAT. Sorry, I just worked it out quickly. It would be 510 Rand per unit.
It would be 510, yeah. 510,
so
not 489.
That amount, that
489, yeah. If it's 489, there's something wrong. It's definitely not correct billing. But you know what it might be? It might be that the city is charging you for too many units. So like you working it out on your calculation of 40 or whatever, 100, but at the end of the day, the city is using 110 or 115. That might be the difference between the correct amount, including that, which would be around 510. If you add in a couple of extra units, it would probably bring it down. So there's probably a disconnect there between the number of units that you're doing your calcs on and the number of units that the city of Joburg is doing it on.
Okay.
The other thing that you might need to look at, if you say it's social housing units, you might be able to apply for indigent status, which will obviously reduce the amounts billable by the city for all of your services. So that might definitely be something to look into.
Okay.
The ESP.
Okay. Yeah. Diggy, you and I will have a look at that. Okay, then Maria just wanted to highlight to everybody that she's seen on earlier bills that there has been errors on VAT where they've credited and debited, including VAT, and then billed VAT on the difference again. So just check your bills, which is what you guys were saying. Clive has asked, he said that council credit agreements are a maximum of 6 months. Is there a way to negotiate a longer period due to the fact that it's a council error?
There isn't technically any reason why they shouldn't give you a longer period in any event than 6 months, especially at the moment because of COVID. COJ is giving a much longer period to owners. I think they've said a deposit of 10% and up to 36 months to pay back. So that's only valid until the end of this month though. So definitely something to take advantage of if that is something that your body corporate wants to do. Or your block of flats building, but whether or not it's the city's error on an AOD, they don't care.
Yeah,
they literally just want their money. So you can scream and shout and hold your breath until you're blue in the face and hope that they'll take into consideration that it's their mistake, and then because of that give you a longer time period. It's not going to happen. But if you do want to do an AOD and you suspect that there's something wrong with your account, please always enter into the AOD under protest to keep your dispute with the city alive. Because if you acknowledge those amounts in terms of an acknowledgement of debt and a payment arrangement, you're basically admitting that you owe that amount to the city. And you can look, I mean, there's whole arguments that we can bring to revive your dispute with the city, but it's just easier if you enter into those acknowledgements under protest. So either on the actual AOD saying, I am entering into this under protest, or before you sign the AOD, doing a letter and having them sign an acknowledgement of receipt of that letter, saying that the amounts are being paid under protest, just to keep your dispute with the city alive, so that if you, or at some later stage, do decide that you want to go ahead with a dispute on this matter, you actually have the option to, and don't struggle to revive your dispute against the city.
That's good to know. I didn't realize you could do that. So thank you. That's very important.
Look, with writing on the actual AOD, they don't like it. So always rather just have kind of like a set letter with you saying that this account number, the AOD entered into on this date for this amount. So you can have like a standard letter that you just leave blank spaces in, so you can hand fill it in. You know, if you have a runner that constantly goes to the city for you or something like that, so that they can quickly fill it in while they're there if they're entering into an AOD for you. But make sure that you have a signed receipt for it so that you can prove that you actually gave it to the city. We often just email the letter through to one of the legal advisors and say, hey, so this AOD is going to be entered into, we're doing it under protest, just FYI.
Okay.
Just to keep your dispute alive.
You can also, again, it just depends on how you actually concluding it. One of the options that we have, you know, because we conclude so many of these for people who owe money, is when we email it through in the covering email, we say this is under protest. But if you're at the call center, you've got nothing to email. So, and they're not going to accept it written onto the document, like Maike says. So you might have a problem proving that you had a dispute, unless, of course, you've got excellent records of every dispute that you've logged previously, and those disputes are still open on the system and blah, 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 blah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I know the council likes to use the AOD as a bit of a blackmailing tool to, oh, it's resolved now because you've signed the acknowledgements of debts. So, yeah, thank you for that. So Phil wants to know, if the estate has monies in reserve, does one still need to invoice each unit the additional amounts?
So it depends on what that money is allowed to be used for. So you should probably maybe just ask Andrew to speak to this, but you know, every body corporate is different, and they will have plans for their reserve funds, or I don't want to use the word reserve funds because that gives you the idea that it's actually from the reserve fund itself, which is different to the administrative fund. But body corporate may have funds sitting somewhere in the administrative fund or in the reserve funds, which are extra in the sense that they're not utilized for anything in this year's budget and they just spare. If you have that kind of funding, you can take a decision to use it for whatever you want to, including this. But you know, your managing agent and your trustees are going to have to look at what they've got and what it's been allocated for, and then depending on what it's allocated for, you may need different kinds of decisions in order to authorize using that for a different purpose, because you're repurposing those funds for this now. But I think you should probably ask Andrew and the guys at Trafalgar to give you a better, more comprehensive idea of what the options are there.
Okay. Then Clive has asked, could a new owner refuse to pay as it predates their ownership?
We believe so, because it's a liability which is incurred by the body corporate. And this would apply to, you know, a life rights member. It would apply to someone who lives in Waterfall and gets a big bill, you know, because they're in Waterfall, and now, you know, Waterfall is the owner of the property, and POJ sends it to the owner, and then it gets passed on to the tenant who has got the leasee, you know, any arrangement of that. We believe that they would be entitled to refuse to pay because it's not in relation to the period in respect of which they undertook to pay for liabilities connected to the property. But you also have to remember that there are two layers of relationships here. The one is the municipality to the body corporate or the owner of the property or the share block or whatever the case may be. And the second layer of relationships is from that entity onto its end users, its shareholders or its sectional title members. And you have to look at each particular scheme and see, when I say scheme, I mean arrangement of buildings, not Ponzi scheme. You've got to look at the way that it's set up, because you may have all sorts of things that complicate this. You may have had a full and final settlement which excludes any future liabilities. You may have had a sale of business of a share block scheme in its entirety, or like there's lots of different things that can complicate it. But generally speaking, you will find that people who exited the scheme are not, you know, they were not an owner at the time that the liability relates to. They're not liable for anything.
Okay. And then Phil wants to know, what are the legal rights to retrospectively charge a past owner?
So as we've just said, if they were an owner in respect of a period of time where a liability has now been raised, you would usually then be entitled to hold them liable. Unless there's something stopping you, you would be entitled to hold them liable. Sometimes where you have very small amounts involved, it's not financially worth doing that because it costs to trace people and it costs to go and send letters of demand, because the gut reaction from when you send someone who exited 3 years ago a letter of demand and go, please pay 2,000 Rand, the gut reaction is, what are you talking about? Leave me alone. So it may not be financially worth it, just depends on the amounts. But yes, you're entitled to do that. And a lot of people are going to say, you can't do that because it's prescribed. I exited more than 3 years ago, whatever the case is, it's obviously prescribed. But prescription only starts to run in terms of our law when the creditor, the knowledge of the claim comes to the creditor's attention. And it's all the facts that together make up the creditor's claim. If you only receive an invoice as the creditor, meaning the body corporate, for example, in September 2020, it was only at that point that you knew that there was a claim, and you then have 3 years from that date to then claim that from the members of the body corporate who were members at that time.
Okay. And then another question here from Clive is, what about staff quarters? Do they count as units?
Generally not, because but it's a little bit difficult because it very much depends on how your staff quarters are comprised. But if you look at the definition of an actual dwelling unit, it's one or more room that includes a kitchen and is used for occupancy purposes. So it very often it just depends on how the staff quarters are actually made up. So because you also often have in blocks of flats, you have rooms. You don't have actual units, where they use communal bathrooms and communal kitchens. Those are technically not dwelling units. So it's a very it's a general question, and I'm trying to answer it as specifically as I can, but you'll have to look at how your actual staff quarters are built, what they comprise of.
Okay.
I'd also like to just point out that different municipalities describe their tariffs in completely different ways. So what we say about Joburg is definitely not going to relate to any other municipality around the country. You can't compare. The second thing is that Joburg also has inconsistent definitions from one type of charge to the next. So you might have a definition which includes rooms in water, but which excludes rooms for sewer. As bizarre as it sounds, I'm not suggesting that is the case. This is just a hypothetical explanation here. So you have to go and look at each tariff for every service, and you have to look at it on a year-by-year basis because these definitions change. To understand, what you're doing for any particular financial year.
Clive says again, surely the council cannot charge the past owners. They should try collect direct from the current owners.
Because the accounts are in the name of the building or of the body corporate, the duty lies with the body corporate for those. So you do get the odd body corporate where, every owner gets their own rates account in any event, where you do get those units that are charged for their own sewer and for their own refuse. So then it would be per owner kind of issue. And then, if it is an old owner, then it is the city's problem. But unfortunately, in these instances, because the accounts are in the name of the body corporate, it is the body corporate's responsibility to settle that account on behalf of the owners. So then it's the body corporate's responsibility to recover those amounts from the owners.
Okay. And then Clive's asked again, can you please just again give illustrative example of how you calculate sewer charges with numbers?
Okay, so let's say you have a body corporate that is a block of flats, that each unit is worth more than R1 million. Up until the 1st of July 2019, you would have been on the block of flats tariff. So I think it was 250 Rand per unit in the 2018 tariffs. So you would take those 10 units times by 250. That's your monthly charge. And then but let's say, and then after the 1st of July 2019, it would have been on the multi-dwelling tariff, which is obviously higher. I'm not 100% sure what those are off the top of my head. But again, you would take the number of units in the scheme on the sectional title register, or if you in a block of flats, then very often you have to refer back to the actual building plans to double check how many numbers of units there are. But you take the number of units in the block of flats and do exactly the same exercise. Whereas if you have a building where all of the units fall within the definition of a block of flats and their value is less than 700,000, you can calculate it as at the block of flats tariff from the 1st of July 2017 until now. Obviously, just taking into consideration that there's 12 months every year and that the tariff is only applicable from the 1st of July until the 30th of June every year.
Yeah. Okay. Don't see any more questions coming through. And we've run over time a little bit. So I just want to say thank you so much, Maike and Chantelle, for joining us today. I really appreciate it. And to members who would like to join the multi-party, multi-party application, that's it, multi-party application, you can email me and I will send you a summary that Chantelle sent me so you can see exactly what you would get for your money, as well as Chantelle's details, so then you can contact her. I have started making a list of all the JPOMA members who have sent me their buildings that they're concerned about. And if you want to get onto that list as well, let me know so that at least we know how many people we're looking at from a JPOMA point of view as well. Ladies, thank you so much for giving us your time today. I really appreciate it. And I know our members appreciate it as well. And I personally would recommend that if your body corporate can afford it and you have 15,000 Rand, please, the more the merrier. It's a great deal. And you'll get covered and your account will get looked at and you'll get a lot more for 15,000 Rand if you went anywhere else. I think. I know. Okay.
Thanks so much, Angela.
Thanks, Angela.
Okay. Oh, wait, hang on. Before we go, let's just see. Oh, just thank you very much. Thank you. Okay. Thank you, ladies.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.